Is Beijing fighting terror or committing cultural genocide? New leaks reveal how China detains more than 1 million Uighur Muslims. The government says it's stamping out extremism, but there's growing condemnation of what's seen as an attempt to wipe out an ethnic group's identity. I'm Imran Garda, and today's newsmakers are the Uyghurs in China's so-called re-education camps. Imagine being locked up against your will simply because of who you are or what you believe. One ethnic minority in China says that's exactly what's happening to them. An estimated 10% of China's Uighur Muslims are being held in what Beijing calls vocational training centers. They're supposed to be places where extremists are de-radicalized. But behind the closed doors of these secret facilities come stories of widespread brutality. Beijing claims it's all fake news. But newly leaked government documents make that hard to believe and have led to international pressure for China to end the abuses. Some Uyghurs have made it out of Xinjiang and sought refuge here in Turkey. But as Melinda Nusifora reports, they may never escape their traumatic memories.
Activists like Abu Akbar Maytak say simply identifying as Uyghur in China is cause for suspicion and even arrest. Uyghurs are a Turkic Muslim minority living mostly in China. The Uyghur Human Rights Project says millions of their people have been accused by Beijing of terrorism or harbouring anti-Chinese sentiments. It says they're being rounded up, detained and sometimes even killed.
Men her gezime çıkmam edip oyladım. Her ketem şıknaldap durumuz 46 kiydirdi. Kolumuz көзі қыпла, iştirpilqi, işim kömeyimiz, nege git bardı, öldürütemdikin dep oylaymiz.
Gulbahar Jalalova says she was held in a concentration camp for more than a year. She says she was confined to a cell just 3 meters wide and 7 meters long.
Hem ketisi kırıyalaqta 14 yaşında 80 yaşqıç kızlar. Hamısının putuda kişen bake, 5 kiloluk kişen. 40 adam boptu ke, 40 adamın 10-20'si bunu kolda koyza, putuğa mandaq çetip koygan. Bir kolda koyza. Putuğdaki kişenge mandaq çetip koygan, maştaq otağan, mandaq dün bop gelip.
She says they'd sit in that hunched position for 17 hours a day and were allowed only 2 hours sleep a night. Human rights groups say prisoners are beaten for days at a time and forced to renounce their religious beliefs and culture.
Şu kaçalı iken aş özünki şu komünist şundaq bir aş ideyik ekegiçe bir bütün şundaq bir milletni yok qilish uchun, assimilyatsiya qilish uchun akatdan buni. Shuni juyimiz deb akat asosi.
Abu Akbar Maytak says his sister has been detained for more than 2 years.
Şu balası ata-onam qıştı qaldı. Şu ata-onalarim bana bek muhtajdı asır. Menki.
He says her only crime is being Uyghur.
Hazır şu ata-onamning bir yaxshi bir persenti bo'lib, shu ota-onamni beqib shu yaşangan vaqtida shularga bir qaraydigan mening shunday bir vaqtlarimda singlimliga hammasiga men bir uydagi akish bo'lib salaydim bilan, bir erkak bo'lib salaydim bilan.
But he says he can't. The father of 2 is living in Turkey with his family. If he goes back to China, he says he'll end up in a camp too. It's unclear exactly how many centres there are, but activists and academics estimate at least 120 detaining more than 1 million people. They're concentrated here in China's western province of Xinjiang, a region Uyghurs call East Turkestan. It was an autonomous Uyghur country briefly in the 1930s and again in the 1940s. But now it's a vital geopolitical corridor in China's infrastructure plans. Leaked documents obtained by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists have exposed what could be described as operating manuals for the detention camps. It's the first time the outside world has been given an insight into how the centres are run. The documents include classified guidelines on how staff prevent escapes, maintain secrecy, and forcibly indoctrinate inmates. But China has dismissed the leak, saying these facilities are re-education centres needed to stamp out extremism.
这里我就想再重申一下，新疆事务纯属中国的内政。个别媒体使用卑劣的手法炒作涉疆问题，污蔑抹黑中国新疆的反恐和去极端化努力的图谋不会得逞。新疆保持大局稳定、民族团结、社会和谐，这是对这些媒体造谣最有力的回击。
Beijing likens the centres to boarding schools or vocational training centres and denies they're being used to torture people.
The document, so-called document you're talking about, is a pure fabrications. If you want to have a document about this vocational training education center, we have many documents. Don't listen to fake news. Don't listen to fabrications.
Yet, the distress in the Uyghur community is undeniable.
Sen bir insanı yok qıvatsa, insanlar bizga o'xshash yashash huquqiga ega deydigan bir dunyoda bir kuch yo'qmi?
But how can rights groups demand a powerful nation like China stop its abuses when it denies it's doing anything wrong? Melinda Nusafora, The Newsmakers.
Well, to answer that, we're joined from Washington, D.C. by the founder of the Uyghur Times agency, Tahir Imin. He himself is a former political prisoner and says more than 20 members of his family have been detained in camps in Xinjiang. In Bangkok, we have political affairs commentator and China analyst Einar Tangen, and Adrian Zenz joins us from Minneapolis. He's a senior fellow in China studies at the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation and played a key role in the uncovering of the extent of China's incarceration of Uyghurs. Gentlemen, good to have you all on the program. Tahir Imin, let me begin with you. When these two separate leaks came out, the first one from the New York Times and the second one from the International Consortium of International Investigative Journalists, did you feel a validation and a confirmation of everything you've been trying to tell people for years?
Yes. It is a strong confirmation about what we have been telling the world over the past 2 years, not only Uyghur activists, but also world major media outlets and academics and Uyghur activists and human rights groups. Even the United Nations has been telling about it. It's strong confirmation about what is China is doing against the Uyghur people.
Einar Tangen, do you accept the validity and authenticity of the documents and everything they tell us?
No, I haven't seen the documents, and I wouldn't validate them. But they, in terms of what they are, the Chinese government denies that they're there. The question is, what in essence is happening there and why? And from the Chinese perspective, it's very important to understand that there were a number of incidents. I'm sure you remember back in Shanghai when a group of Uighur extremists ran down a subway platform, indiscriminately butchering young men, old children, women. And this kind of thing is not acceptable in China. The Chinese government is a one-party system, so they cannot afford to have any kind of political or physical unrest like that. So there was a decision made around that time that they were going to try to figure out how to prevent what they saw as a situation getting worse, and that was a 11 million population of Uyghurs becoming increasingly isolated because many of them did not have the basic skills. And by that, I mean, they had not studied science, they didn't have trades, they didn't speak English, Chinese.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And as a result, were unable to get gainful employment, in essence, creating an underclass. And this is, I think, one of the issues. If China doesn't do something, and something happens, the Chinese people will condemn the government, and the international community will say, look, you didn't do anything to help these people.
But it does seem to be one hell of a solution to try to fix the problem of an underclass by putting more than 1 million people into camps. Adrian Zenz, I want to come to you here because we're getting mixed messages from the Chinese. On the one hand, the government saying these documents are fake news. On the other hand, we see from Chinese media justification for the necessity of the camp, saying, yes, we had these attacks in Urumqi and Kashgar, and there's extremism, and we need to do something about it, and the West has the war on terror, they shouldn't lecture us, and so on and so forth. My question to you, Adrian, is that has the Chinese government been caught off guard by these documents coming out?
Yes, I believe they have. In fact, I believe they have been caught off guard from the beginning. They were caught off guard last year when there was comprehensive evidence from their own documents that showed procurement bids with vocational training camps, with walls, with barbed wire, with watchtowers, with dedicated police stations. This year, more information came out. Hundreds of police stationed in vocational training camps. Government documents talking openly that these camps are designed to brainwash people. And I think the Chinese strategy, as we see from the leaked confidential document, was to say this is highly classified, this is highly confidential, nobody can talk about it, nobody can take any photos or collect any data. They were really expecting to keep a lid on it until it was kind of ready. They had brainwashed and broken the Uyghurs and came out with it. But they were caught off guard, and last year at the United Nations, they were forced into making a public statement. Now again, a confidential internal document has leaked that gives unprecedented insight into the fact that these camps are run like high-security prisons, completely contradicting the narrative of the Chinese. And this kind of contradiction between external propaganda and what they're internally saying in both public and secret government documents, this contradiction has been there from the beginning.
Right, and the document showing that Xi Jinping has told officials to show absolutely no mercy in effecting the repression of these people. They also show that the party has opened 12,000 investigations into officials who weren't cracking down harshly enough on the people in the camps. Tahir Imin, I understand you have family members in the camps. I wonder, has anybody been charged with a crime? Has anybody been told this is why we have locked you up?
The Chinese Communist Party, they think it's not necessary to explain why Uyghurs are being detained and rounded up or imprisoned for tens of years in long-term prisons because there is no one can monitor them. When it comes to my family members, my mother and stepmom, my Tuhan, she was a fashion designer. My brother, Adil, he was a business owner of a transportation company. And a lot of Uyghur intellectuals, business owners, religious leaders, artists, poets, those people are not religious extremists or terrorists. All of them are well-educated. They have very good relations with other people, including a lot of ethnic groups, not only Han Chinese, but also Kyrgyz, Kazakh, Uzbek, other groups. And those people, Chinese wants to sinicize those people, wipe out Uyghur identity. They don't have any reason besides other than that. So they don't explain. Most of them are sentenced without any judicial trail.
Okay, and it's good to know that and good to hear that from you. I want to have a little listen to somebody who's been affected by this, who's not ethnically Uyghur. Have a listen.
I have seen it with my own eyes. There, they have a camp which they call re-education camps. But it's not a re-education camp. It is a jail. It's a jail. They have kept all the people in that jail. In every room there are around 20 people. There is no provision for cleanliness there. The place is so filthy that many of the people have become ill. They are in a very bad state. They're not even getting proper food.
Einar Tangen, this particular gentleman is Pakistani. There are also Uzbeks, Kazakhs, and others. So fundamentally, does China have a problem with its Muslim minority?
I don't think it's necessarily a problem with the Muslim minority. I mean, they have, there was about 200 million different beliefs in China, despite the fact that China is basically a agnostic state. The issue is that they see Uyghurs as being those Uyghurs who have not been brought into the mainstream. And I'm not disputing what the young man said about his family and things like that, but they believe that there are some intellectuals who are trying to lead the Uyghurs in this kind of independence movement, and that the people who are within, especially the agriculture areas, who do not have the skill sets and, in essence, no hope, because they don't, they can't get jobs outside their
but I know we're not getting evidence of people learning. We're not getting evidence of people learning skills. We're not getting evidence of people growing as individuals and becoming better people. We're getting reports of torture and repression. Yes.
If you want to believe that the Chinese are just have decided that they want to repress a bunch of people for no apparent reason,
I don't want to believe it. I'm just reading the documents.
Well, you're reading the document, but I mean, the setup of the show, of course, is very one-sided. From the Chinese perspective, if you went on the streets of Beijing, Shanghai, or any other places, and you asked them, what should the government be doing? They said they should be doing exactly what they're doing. In some cases, they'd say,
but if that's okay, but that doesn't mean it would be morally right, right? Einar, if people are being repressed, it doesn't make it morally right. Yes.
Say morally right or wrong. There are differences in how cultures look at each other in terms of things like in Asia, the state and the society takes precedent.
But are you saying it is? Are you saying, sir, that it is culturally acceptable in China to treat the Uyghur people as subhuman?
Not subhuman. To make sure that there is no problem. That's what they're trying to do.
Adrian Zenz. Adrian Zenz, come in.
Yes.
Come in here. I wonder what you think about.
Oh, you want me to comment on that?
Yes, I wonder what you think about the perspective you're hearing from Einar Tangen.
Yes. The reason why the Chinese government is really trying to break the Uyghurs, if we try to give this a wording. It is quite true that the Uyghurs have struggled economically. They're typically farmers. They have been economically disadvantaged. However, what we see both from the secret and from other government documents is that vocational training is not the primary focus of this internment campaign. Vocational training happens later. The government actually pays private companies subsidies of 1,800 Chinese yuan per worker that private companies train in Xinjiang after they've been released from a camp. What the camps do is they try to change people's thinking and belief to the core, and they use repression and intimidation to do that. The reason they do this is they have perceived the Uyghurs are different. The Uyghurs are culturally and spiritually closer to Istanbul than to Beijing. The Chinese have long had trouble with the Uyghurs, and this is not just an ethnic problem, it's also an ideological problem, because the communist state, especially starting after the 19th Party Congress and the establishment of a new religion law in early 2018, started to crack down much more severely on other forms of organized religion, especially also house churches and also Islamic communities outside of Xinjiang, the Hui in Yunnan and Ningxia. And therefore in Xinjiang, the crackdown is particularly trying to break the cultural spine and the spiritual spine of the Uyghurs. And what the eyewitnesses are saying is that in the camps, they're being forced to renounce their beliefs.
Breaking the cultural spine of the Uyghurs, and particularly looking at their religion. This is fascinating to me because as the reports have come out over the past couple of years, Tahir Imin, every opportunity that I've had to speak with a leader within the Muslim world who usually talk very boldly, they usually talk very boldly about repression of Muslims around the world, whether it's with the Palestinians or Kashmir or elsewhere. I've asked them about the Uyghur situation. Have a little listen to what they had to say to me, Tahir. You're doing business with China. Does that mean you can't criticize them when it comes to what they're doing to the Uyghurs?
I do not know the exact situation of this. Frankly, I mean, I just have to tell you the truth.
Yeah, well, China is a very powerful nation.
It's easy to talk big about Palestine, but China, we don't want to say anything, even though they're persecuting Muslims.
Well, not hypocritical, but circumspectful because of the concerns that such policy statements may affect the common person.
You know, in Pakistan at the moment, since we've been in power, 4 months, I've taken 5 days off.
It is powerful. He is capable of taking action on its own.
So do Muslim countries have to be careful about condemning China?
We do what we can.
But I think we should still reserve the right to express our views, even albeit politely.
Tahir Imin, at worst, Imran Khan saying, well, I don't know about this and I haven't had a day off and I haven't read about it. At best, we have Mahathir and Anwar Ibrahim saying, well, you know, we have to go softly, softly, and China's dangerous, we have to be careful. Does that mean that nobody really is going to help you?
It doesn't mean that there is not any people concerning about the Uyghur situation. First of all, the Western world have been speaking and asking China and making pressure to release those detained Uyghurs. Uyghur people are thankful to Western world, led by United States and the European Union. But when it comes to Muslim world, we have realized that when I was in the region, the Uyghur people have been praying for the people, Palestinian, Kashmir, Rohingya, and all of the oppressed Muslims around the world. And in Jummah Namaz and a lot of public rallies, we have been praying. At the time it was permitted to pray openly. We have been praying those people. But when it comes to us, when Uyghur Muslims were oppressed, the Muslim world silenced it. It clearly, explicitly says that the Muslim world are not the real Muslims. They don't believe, they don't worship Rahman Rahim Allah, but they worship the dollar of Chinese Communist Party. They don't fear the Almighty Allah, but they fear the Chinese Communist Party.
Wow, that's powerful. Einar Tangen, the criticism has come from the US Secretary of State Pompeo. It's also come from White House National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien, who has called them concentration camps in Xinjiang. Tell me how much that grates with the Chinese. Tell me how much that upsets the Chinese when the Americans say that.
Well, I don't know that the Chinese necessarily see it as very genuine coming from the U.S. because they see that at every corner of their nation, they believe that the U.S. is trying to devise 360 degrees of pressure, whether it's sailing ships and selling through the Taiwan Straits, selling arms to Taiwan, whether it's supporting the rioters in Hong Kong, bringing up Xinjiang, Tibet. You know, in essence, it's every corner. And they believe that the U.S. is trying to use this for trade advantage, not necessarily because they believe in any kind of particular cause that is being advanced here. And I'm saying all Americans, I'm saying the current administration. There are other parts of the Democrats have in the past pushed on human rights and things like that. And I would imagine if they get in the White House, they'll continue to do that, but in a very different way, perhaps, than what is currently being offered by this administration.
Adrian Zenz, are we seeing a shift in terms of international pressure on the Chinese after the documents have come out?
Yes, I believe we see the beginning of that. Initially, it was only the United States who dared to speak out. It was truly remarkable that a letter signed by 22 countries in the summer at the United Nations condemning China's actions in Xinjiang was signed by a measure whereby you could not identify the country that was taking the lead. Too great was the fear among the Western community of retribution. Now, after the leak in Germany, there's been a big wave of news. It stirred a public debate also about the involvement of German companies in the region, like Volkswagen, Siemens, and BASF. The German government and the UK and the French governments have now made statements expressing great concern and demanding unfettered access for an independent United Nations fact-seeking mission to the area. The European Union's new upcoming Commission Chief von der Leyen has said that on her first day of work, she will raise this with the Chinese counterparts. And it is really high time, because the first thing in this whole human rights atrocity is really to name the child by its name and to speak out.
Right.
That's the very first step.
Adrian,
but that's not enough.
Right.
We
Adrian,
need to move from talking to action.
Okay, Adrian, I've got to wrap. Gentlemen, this has been a really important story to cover from our perspective, and I thank you all for taking the time. Adrian, Einar, and Tahir, thanks again for joining us here on the Newsmakers. And thank you for watching. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.